We begin reading in Exodus 21, verse 33. This can be found on page 74 of your Pew Bibles. Exodus 21, verse 33. When a man opens a pit, or when a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restoration. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead beast shall be his. When one man's ox butts another's, so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and share its price, and the dead beast also they shall share. Or if it is known that the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has not kept it in, he shall repay ox for ox, and the dead beast shall be his. If a man steals an ox or a sheep, and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox, and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him, but if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field and in his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make full restitution. If a man gives to his neighbour money or goods to keep safe, and it is stolen from the man's house, then, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbour's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is an ox, for a donkey, for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing, of which one says, "This is it," the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to the neighbour. If a man gives to his neighbour a donkey, or an ox, or a sheep, or any beast to keep safe, and it dies or is injured or is driven away, without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them both, to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbour's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has not been torn. If a man borrows anything of his neighbour, and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. If the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it was hired, it came from its hiring fee. So far the reading of God's word. Now it's opportunity for children going to Creche for Christ to go.
Well, in Auckland, we lived on a corner section, and this corner had a reputation for car accidents. And over the time that we lived there were a number of cars that crashed through our fence. And one of the more dramatic ones happened at 2 a.m. in the morning. We woke up to a very loud bang as a car had missed the corner, but found our property, crashed through the fence, and parked its car into a very big tree. The car was written off. It was the guy's mum's car. It was a Dodge Avenger. And we later found out that this man was on a restricted license. He had 4 passengers in the car. It was 2 a.m. in the morning, and he had been drinking. all of that together means no insurance. But he owed us a fence. And thankfully, New Zealand has laws relating to the restitution of property. And so if you are charged with an offence, the courts can order that you repay. And so over the next 3 years or so, he paid us back, slowly but surely. These laws of restitution are good laws because they provide a means of justice, a means of restoring good order and making right what was lost. We have laws of restitution in New Zealand. But aside from New Zealand's laws, there are also some less helpful, unofficial laws or rules that are built into the fabric of society. Here are a few of them. If you can find a loophole, use it. In other words, if there's a way that you can get away with something, make the most of it, because at the end of the day, it's the lawmaker's fault for just not writing the laws properly, unless, of course, you are the lawmaker. Another one is do what you've got to do to keep the peace. There's a minimum standard to keep people off your back, find that lowest bar, and try to settle things there. There is a third unofficial rule that we operate on, and that is finders, keepers, losers, weepers. We learn this primarily from friends at school who are just better at finding things than we are. And the law is, if it's on the ground, it's up for grabs. You lost it, it's your own fault. You dropped the chocolate bar, I found it, finders, keepers. Now, to be clear, especially for the children, these are not good rules, and they're certainly not biblical rules. Why? Because they're trying to work out what is the least I can get away with. What is the lowest bar of restoration? We look for ways to pay less, do less, and get more. So what should our target of restoration be? Is New Zealand law the target, or does God set us a different standard? Do ancient laws about goring oxen and burning grain and injured donkeys have anything to do with us in 21st century New Zealand? And so today we are looking at, as we work our way through Exodus, we're in what's called the Book of the Covenant, 3 chapters of laws about how Israel are to operate as a society. And today we are looking at the second mark of a holy nation, restitution. And I want you to see that we are called to a superior standard of restoration than what is on the papers in Parliament. Not less than New Zealand law, but more than it. God's restoration, or kingdom restoration, is generous restoration. It is full and it is free. So we are going to look at this passage and see, firstly, the laws of restoration as we find them here, then the God of restoration, and then what it means for us to be a people of restoration. So we're going to look at Israel, and then God, and then us. So the first thing we will see is the laws of restoration. We do live in a fallen world, and in a world of sin, property and possessions are damaged and stolen and lost. It is a reality of our fallen world. And sometimes these can have a substantial impact on our livelihood. Our livelihood depends on employment and real estate and money. Israel's livelihood depended on ox and sheep and grain and fields. That was the currency of the day for them. Ox were like the tractors of the east, and grain quite literally put bread on the table. And in these laws, God is showing himself as one who cares for their livelihood. It is, however, a strange time for Israel to be receiving laws about property and vineyards, particularly because at the moment they're camping at the base of Mount Sinai. They don't own land. They haven't for 4 centuries. So why get these laws now? Well, they're on the doorstep of the promised land. They don't know yet that they're going to spend the next 40 years wandering in the wilderness. As far as they're concerned, these laws are about to have immediate implications as they set up permanently in Canaan. Now, this passage hinges really on 2 basic principles. The first is that you have a duty of care not to damage other people's belongings. And if you do, you have a duty of care to restore what was lost, both belongings and the relationship. You must, there is a word that comes through really strongly in this passage, and it is the Hebrew word shalem. Shalem means to make amends for what you lost and to bring it back to completeness. So in these verses, every time you see the word restitution, restoration, repay, payback, surely pay, they are all the word shalem. You must, it comes from the word shalom, which means peace, or to make complete, to make whole again. So every time it says restoration or repayment or any of those words, it is saying, make good what was lost, make amends for what was lost, and bring it back to completeness. Now, this passage has 5 key sections, and we're going to look briefly at each of them and what they meant. The first comes in verses 33 to 36 of chapter 21, and it relates to dangerous property. You've dug a hole, and you had good intentions. You were digging a well, or you were drilling a hole to make a rubbish pit in on the outskirts of town, but you ran out of the time in the day to put plywood over the top and your bright orange safety mesh around it, and some poor donkey is going for a walk in the morning and it falls in and it dies. Who's responsible? Oh, you are. Guilty on the basis of negligence. Or verse 36, you have an angry bull. We could call it Bruno. Bruno's got a reputation. He's always breaking through your number 8 wire fence and causing havoc, and he likes to fight. And your neighbors told him, they warned you, he's dangerous, put him down. But you didn't. And Bruno picked another fight, and he won. Who is responsible? Once again, you are for allowing dangerous property to roam free. And so in those situations, you have an obligation to restore what was lost. In situations of negligence or accidents, restoration is simply paying back the cost. There are, however, other times that making amends means paying over and above the cost of what was lost. And this happens when there's been a crime. So the second one, for example, deals with stolen property. We see this in chapter 22, verses 1 to 4, stolen property. This is dealing with the 8th commandment, do not steal. An Israelite looks across at his neighbor and he sees that this neighbor has a sheep and the sheep's going to make some good lamb chops, and so he waits till it's pitch black, goes across to his neighbor's field, steals the sheep, brings it home, and then eats the evidence. But someone noticed, and he's called to court. Now, because he stole the sheep, which is a crime, he owes the neighbor 4 sheep to every one that he stole. He has to pay back the sheep that he stole, but he also has to pay another 3 for the crime, because he's broken trust with his neighbor. The law requires that one must make amends for the loss that you are responsible for, possessions, and relationship. Now, a 4-to-1 ratio of sheep or a 5-to-1 ratio of ox might seem like a lot, but actually this system is putting limitations on how much you have to pay back. It was known at the time that a king could require 10 to 30 times the amount that was damaged. And some surrounding nations would even seek the death penalty for such offences. Some of these laws remind me of criminals who would get sent to Australia back in the 1800s for their serious crimes. Some people would get sent for stealing a loaf of bread. Other people would steal bed linen and clothing from a house, and they would get sent over to Australia. Now, these are still sins, but are they worthy of moving someone all the way to Australia from the UK? It was considered more humane to send them away than it was to give them the death penalty. And so when you compare 4-1 sheep or 5-1 oxen, it is a very moderate compensation. The underlying principle in these verses is don't be overzealous in seeking compensation from your neighbor. Limit your enthusiasm to seek back. Now, one of the specific rules, and a very important rule in here, it comes in the end of verse 3. It says, if he has nothing, he shall be sold for his theft. In other words, someone breaks into your property, you catch the thief, but he can't pay back what he stole or more, and so in that situation, the man becomes a slave. This is why chapter 21 dealt with slaves. There was always a means of restitution. And if you can't pay the price, you become the price. The third section here is damaged property. It comes in verses 5 and 6. You had some cows and they got hungry, and so you let them loose on your neighbor's property and they just demolished everything. The word for grazed over in verse 5 is actually the word burnt. Your neighbors scorched your neighbor's property. Or maybe in verse 6, you've lit a bonfire, it gets out of control, and it's burnt their property to the ground. In Hebrew, the word for fire is actually ate. Your fire ate the neighbor's property. But remember, these laws are putting limitations on restoration. And these situations may sound quite extreme to us, but it's only because we've become accustomed to quite a sanitized Western culture that's built on Christian principles. I've heard stories in the islands, I think it was Papua New Guinea, about the things that missionaries were having to deal with there. One person would go through and steal some chickens from a neighbor. The neighbor would go and say, hey, you stole my chickens, and they would burn their land. And then what do you think the neighbor's going to do? He's going to say, hey, you burnt my land, I'm going to burn your house and your land. Just repay back. It was just ultimate retaliation and revenge. What we have here are means of peaceful restoration. God wants his people to act differently to surrounding nations and take responsibility for what they damage, because God cares about the livelihood of his people. Israel is not going to make much progress in the promised land if they're busy destroying each other. The fourth section we have here is entrusted property, and this comes in verses 7 to 13. And these verses deal with what you are to do if someone entrusts property to your care. They're going away on holiday, so they leave you with their jewels and their life savings of cash. And while they're away, it all goes missing, the whole lot. So everyone's worst nightmare. Your friend trusted you with his livelihood, and you lost it. You were to be a good steward of it, to care for it, and then you've failed. You have to deal with the awkward situation when your friend comes back and accuses you of having lost or stolen his stuff. Did you steal it, or did someone steal it from you? And in these situations, the two of you would come before God, and somehow, we're not told, somehow God would say who was the innocent party and who was at fault, and the restoration would be an appropriate amount. The key principle, though, is this: take responsibility for what is entrusted to you. Be a good steward of other people's things. The last section deals with borrowed property in verses 14 and 15. And you borrow a cow and it dies, or a car and it breaks, and you have to pay it back. But if the owner was with you, then he can see that you didn't do anything wrong, and so then you don't owe him. Or if it was hired, you've paid the price and the fee, insurance included, and so you don't owe anything. There are 5 sections, and they provide some guidelines for Israel about restoring property and possessions. They don't cover every scenario, but at the heart of these principles, God is showing that he cares about the livelihood of his people. He wants his people then to show that same care for others. He wants his people to function in good order. Imagine if there were no laws of restoration. It would be absolute carnage in the promised land as everyone tries to claim back with force what was taken from them and more. You would never want to look after anyone's things or put a foot wrong out of fear. You accidentally eat your brother's chocolate bar and he says you owe him a bike. Or you spill your coffee on your friend's laptop and he thinks he gets the keys to your house. Laws of restoration are good laws. These laws helped society, but actually more important, they helped Israel and us appreciate who God is. These are holy laws for a holy nation. What do they reveal about the holy lawgiver? So we've seen the laws of restoration for Israel. Now we see the God of restoration. As we've already seen, God cares. He cares about the livelihood of his people. He's a God of love. He cares about your work and whether you have enough to live. He wants to know that you are provided for and have your daily bread. But these laws also reveal that God is a God of integrity and faithfulness, who wants to restore what was lost. And we see this most fully in creation. The world belongs to God because he made it, and he made it in good order. And then he entrusted it to us to care for it and to rule over it, to be stewards of his creation, of his property. The duty of care lay on us to look after what he made. But we, in Adam, threw the world out of order. We broke his property. And it wasn't only a field that was ruined, we ruined the whole earth. All of it. The extent of the damage was huge. And then we pretended like it wasn't our fault. It wasn't me. It was the serpent. This damage was physical and spiritual. It was material and relational. And God's faithfulness requires that this world be restored to good order, to how it was. It needs to go from being damaged to being fixed. And because we caused the destruction, the duty of care is on us to both restore God's world and the relationship with God. As a sinner, you owe God for the damage. And the duty of care is on you to restore it. How much have you got in your bank account? It won't be enough to pay God back for ruining the earth. Nothing you can do can restore what was broken. We can't pay the price. And so we should become the price. There's a broken world. There's a God of integrity and faithfulness who will stop at nothing to see that what he made gets restored. And then there's a bunch of hopeless sinners with nothing to give. So what did God do? Well, God took the duty of care on himself to completely restore the world that was destroyed. The Son of God would become a man so that man could pay the price that he owed. The Son of God becomes the payment price. God's restoration here is generous restoration because God himself makes the payment by giving of his Son. He sends the Prince of Peace, the Prince of Shalom, to make full restoration, full shalem. And this restoration is more than a like for like. Insurance will always give back what was lost, like for like. But this restoration is far more glorious than what came first. God is restoring the world to something double or fourfold or even fivefold, abundant and generous restoration. He's not just bringing back Eden version 1, but Eden version 2, a new heavens and a new earth. He's not just restoring the world, he's making it so much better. And it's not just the earth as a place, but the relationship between us and God as well. legal settlements today usually deal with property. It's like a fence that gets broken and needs to be fixed. But it's uncommon for legal settlements to actually restore a relationship. Thieves might pay back what was stolen, but they're unlikely to come around for a drink. God's restorative work is greater because it deals with both. God restores the earth and our relationship with Him. And so in these laws, God is revealing Himself as a gracious God, a God who restores, a God of full and free restoration, a God who restores not at your cost but at His. He takes the hit for us. And I think this changes then how we understand the law. So when we read Exodus 22, there's more than a legal operating system happening here. It's more than a box-ticking exercise. This is revealing the holiness and the grace of God to undeserving sinners. Now, our general position as a church is that these civil laws are not binding on us today. We live in a different time, country, and governmental structure. So we can't just copy and paste these laws onto the New Testament church. But there are principles behind these laws that continue. The Westminster Confession talks about the general equity of the laws, or the general principles for God's holy people. God is generous in restoration. He takes the duty of care on Himself to protect and to restore, and so then His people must take the duty of care on themselves to protect and restore. You do this as someone who has received God's generous restoration. In Luke chapter 19, Zacchaeus provides us with a wonderful example of how this looks. In Luke 19, we're introduced to Zacchaeus. He's a tax collector, stolen truckloads of money from numerous people through taxes. And when he comes to follow Jesus, he has a change of heart. And by the grace of God, he says, if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. 4-to-1 restoration. When he understands how he has been restored to God through Christ, he takes it on himself to restore what he has taken from others. Knowing the God of restoration changes how we live. And so the third thing we then see is a people of restoration. What does this mean for us? You are a chosen and a holy nation, a people under grace, but this grace should not make us reckless or negligent, especially with things that don't belong to us. This grace shown leads us to acknowledge our wrongs of negligence or accidents or maybe even theft, and then be willing to pay and restore to others. And so we're going to see 4 principles from this text for Christians today. Now, the danger is that you will see these principles and think of what others owe you. They damaged it, so they owe me. That's what it says. We most easily see ourselves as the victim and what we are entitled to receive. What they must restore to me. But remember that that is not how God treated you. Instead of demanding of you what you couldn't give, He took the duty on Himself to pay for your debt. Justice is important, by all means, but the principles here are not what others owe you. It's about your duty of care towards others as someone who has received so much from God. So here are 4 principles. First, do what is in your power to protect other people's property and possessions. If you can find a way of preventing harm to others, then take steps to do that. For example, if you have a tree that is rotting and could fall onto your neighbor's property, consider cutting it down before it falls. If you know that your car needs new tires, don't just stretch it out to the next warrant of fitness. Get it fixed early. If you have mossy footpaths that someone could fall over on, water blast them to keep them safe. If you can find ways to protect jobs within your company, do it. Do what is in your power to protect other people's property and possessions, especially when it relates to their livelihood. Second one, take responsibility for damage caused to other people's property. If you damage someone else's belongings, the onus is on you then to restore this. So children, if you crash your bike into someone else's bike, then you've got to help them fix it, especially if you did it on purpose. If you have a company that is going into liquidation, adults, you need to do everything in your power to pay back the debts that you owe. The restoration of property is quite interesting in New Zealand law because it allows us to plead bankruptcy or to fold a company and then walk away free. In recent months, there's a company called Custom Kits in Pukekohe has gone under after the administrator stole $520,000 over about a year by writing fake invoices. And she's only able to pay about a third of the money back. She will face the courts, but she will not restore the money. Is that full restoration? Is that taking responsibility? When I was working as an engineer, we were designing this job, and in construction, the job dragged out for various reasons for a number of years. And when they went to get a certification for the waterproofing, the company would not provide it because they fold their company every 2 years so that people can't claim back from them. It's to protect themselves. And so if the building leaks, well, that was an old company's problem. Apparently it's legal. But is it right? Is that taking responsibility for damage? As Christians, we are called to a superior standard of holiness, one that cares for other people, for their livelihoods, for their things that they own. And we are called to restore what we break. Why? Because God made restoration for the damage that we caused. So the least we can do is to extend this to others. Third principle here is take special care of what others entrusted to your care, or things that you borrow from others. My parents always had a rule: when you give something back, give it back in the same or better condition than what you borrowed it. I'm sure they got it straight out of Exodus 22. It's a good principle. If someone gives you something to look after and you lose it, the question should not be, how much can I get away with, but how can I take responsibility for what I lost and pay back what was lost? Why? Because God took responsibility for what you lost. The fourth principle here is don't be overzealous seeking restitution from others. Rather than playing the victim card and milking your offender for everything that they're worth, when you go to seek restitution, be moderate in your claim. Be willing to even be the wronged party. Why? Because God didn't claim a cent from you for the damages that you caused. He entirely paid for your debt in a broken world. Learn content in Christ. Dependent on property and belongings that you become over-possessive about, to hold on to it or to not give it back. Congregation, the New Zealand law is actually a low benchmark for restoration. We are called as a holy people to care generously for people's livelihoods and restore relationships. And this will mean that we have to go above and beyond the law, to have a heart like Zacchaeus, that under His restoration to us, His love towards us, desires to seek that restoration to others. Restoration God's kingdom is full and free. It is abundant and it is generous. And he took the care of himself to completely restore what we destroyed. As a holy people, living for a holy God, we then have a duty of care towards others. In your restoration, you resemble the God who restored you. Amen.